everyone. So this is my first time speaking, so I'm so sorry if I'm a little bit nervous, but thank you all so much for coming. Natuma natuk linyum kurumuk, natuk mereng yaragundij, natuk laka pikwarum. So that was just a little bit of an introduction in my language. It's basically saying, hi, my name is Phoebe. I am from the Yarragunditj clan and I speak Pikwarum. So yes, as I said, my name is Phoebe, and today I'll be talking about my perspectives on Aboriginal culture in video games and the experience I have had working with community in game development. So before I continue, I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous custodians of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So just as a little bit of a background of myself, I'm a proud Indigenous woman of the Yarragunditj clan. I was born in Warrnambool, which is the southwest coast of Victoria. I've been blessed to have been taught my culture from my dad my entire life. I grew up dancing, learning language and stories. And as the theme for this year is introspection, I recognise that this is a huge privilege to have. I know many Indigenous people did not have the same opportunity as myself. So this brings me to the first point that I kind of wanted to address in my talk today. When working with community, my dad has always kind of warned me to be really conscious of the fact that I have been privileged enough to being taught my culture as I grew up and had that readily available to myself. But as we know, a lot of Indigenous people don't know anything at all about their culture. So I should be very wary to the fact that people don't know anything, as we don't want to upset anyone. What I'd kind of like to get across here is that if you're interested in creating a game using Indigenous culture, that it is really important to be sensitive to people's personal histories. We don't want to create a culture of using Indigenous stories and lore for financial gain, or more rather than to help respect, preserve, and share one of the oldest living cultures on the planet. So I have been working with community in a game sense for a short period of time, thanks to Paulina, Sammy, and the amazing team at Dragon Bear Studios, who have given me this amazing opportunity to work with them, and they've guided me through my process of consultations. However, I have spent a lot of time involved with my community, and particularly through dancing and cultural mentoring, hence the gorgeous photo on the slides here. So Dragon Bear Studios are working on a fantasy game called Chaos Tavern and are embedding Indigenous culture into their game. They've employed me to consult with community about whether certain themes and elements are appropriate to gauge what Indigenous people might like to see being showcased. This has created an opportunity for Indigenous people to have an input into what they might like to be highlighted in this new form. Chaos Tavern is a fantastical reimagined Australia where the rulers of the land are Indigenous sovereigns. Indigenous beliefs and lore are being intertwined into the game, such as the land is one of the most important things and we take every step to take care of us, because in turn that'll come back to us. And that the elders are the knowledge holders. Excuse me. An idea that came across from a consultation that I actually had with an elder was the idea that trees are one of the oldest living things on this planet, and they would hold so much knowledge. So what has come out of that are actually some tree ents that players can go to for knowledge. So I was a part of a process of designing one of the Indigenous characters, Biana. This is her. I worked with an Indigenous artist when coming up with her design. And when I imagined her, I kind of wanted to steer away from stereotypical Indigenous people, because we already see so much of that. But I did want to embrace her Aboriginal features. So curly hair, beautiful brown eyes. When I came up with her clothing, I still wanted her to be really, really practical because she's an adventurer. So hence a dress that's movable, but she's good to go, and she's still staying close to her background. When creating creatures for the game, we really wanted some more inspiration from Australian animals, but also Indigenous stories. So through my consultations with community and elders, it was really clear to stay away from any creator spirits or animals. And when creating these creatures, to primarily take inspiration from them rather than just using them in the game. So when I started my research, I looked into a bunch of stories online and stories that I had also been told from my dad and my uncles and aunties. So I wrote down descriptions of the creatures and their personalities, and then I took what I thought would be most interesting about that creature's behaviour. Just for example, a creature that lurks in the darkness and likes to steal like shiny things. And then I would rework how their appearance might suit and accommodate that kind of behaviour. So I was thinking like maybe like a monkey-limbed kind of animal that with dark fur that's easy to blend in. Also ensuring along the way that they differ enough from the traditional stories that they originate from. So just to talk a little bit how I go about it from my perspective. Firstly, it's really important to do some research into who you need to consult with. There are hundreds of clans and language groups around Australia. They are very tightly packed within just the states. You can go from town to town and have completely different clans and tribes. So for Chaos Tavern, my thoughts were that because the game is being created out of Melbourne, that it would be appropriate to consult with the people of the Kulin Nation. On the other hand, though, if you decide to create a game around Uluru, it would be a really good idea to consult with the elders and communities from those areas. It would not be appropriate to ask people around here if you were creating a game in there, or areas that you'd like to collaborate with. So if you have multiple, it's probably best to consult with multiples of the community. So when I approach elders or Indigenous people about doing consultation, I firstly ask if they're interested. Obviously, you can't force somebody to do a chat with you. And making sure it's a relaxed and really informal environment. And then I try to explain the best I can in terms that they might understand how the game is going to go, what kind of things are done in the game, and what we kind of want to work into it. So as you would with any kind of play testers, just tweaking the language enough so that they can understand what you're trying to create. So some of these people may not even have held a controller or played any kind of digital game. So just remembering that the language and terms that we might use on a daily basis could be extremely foreign to them. So I found that a little bit, just trying to explain what, like a first-person shooter, or that's not what the game is, but things like that. So yeah, although these people may not be your intended audience for a game, their knowledge and opinions are really just as important to the creation of your game. The main focus of my consultations with community and elders particularly is to find out whether the Indigenous-inspired aspects of the game are appropriate to have, and making sure they're presented correctly in a respectful manner. And then at the very end of my consultation, once I finish asking all the questions and making sure if they have any questions, I then give them an opportunity to see maybe what they might like to see in the game, just as another opportunity to give them a sense of they have some more input and what they might think is really important to be highlighted within your game. This can give you a really good direction in terms of raising awareness and help spreading cultural awareness around like social issues, because you're getting a really unique perspective from these Indigenous people. So in the end, there might occasionally be people who are unhappy with what you've created with, but opinions will be varied, as in with any community, with any game. As I said earlier, there are hundreds of tribes all over Australia. So when it comes to stories, there are actually crossovers. There's different stories for the same animals, or even events as well. So a suggestion that I could make when developing your game is just to make it clear who you're collaborating with and where those stories have originated from. Another thing I think it's important to be aware of is that some stories and some knowledge is sacred. So we have a lot of women's and men's business that we don't even share between like genders or other tribes. So this is knowledge that is really special to Indigenous people and isn't openly shared. So just as like a warning that there is content that is not appropriate to have in games, and just being really respectful and conscious of those. And then in the end, as long as you have consulted and done it in a really respectful manner with a major focus on including Indigenous people in your design process, you're doing really well. So with my dad, I have been working as a cultural mentor to young kids, and as Chad said, I'm studying game design at RMIT, and now being able to work within the community with Dragon Bear Studios. It's really opened my eyes to the importance of solidifying Indigenous culture in new forms and the opportunities this could bring out. It's not detrimental to make games that feature Indigenous content. I'm not saying that we need this, but if we can, like, why don't we? This is so crazy. Why don't we have multitudes of forms for everyone to access and learn and experience the culture of my people? It's definitely a really accessible way to do that. And games are becoming even more accessible with a wide range of audiences playing them. Why not put Indigenous stories and knowledge into a form where technology is like really evolving and present right now? So doing this is one way for non-Indigenous people to learn something about Indigenous culture in a completely different form. And this doesn't only apply to Australian Aboriginal culture, but every culture in the entire world. Imagine experiencing and interacting with stories from all over the world and finishing a game knowing you've just experienced something amazing from a culture from the other side of the planet. Today's games are becoming hugely westernized, and when we look at major genres like fantasy, action-adventure, RPGs, MMOs, etc. But when you break them down, you can really intertwine culture into any of these genres. Imagine an action-adventure game about exploring and finding artifacts in the Australian outback, or even a fantasy game using Indigenous monsters and lore as inspiration. So these aren't the most creative or the most original ideas, but I came up with them on the spot within a second. And imagine what we could create when you've spent months fleshing out an entire idea with sought help from the community. We have a major opportunity to have culture expressed through video games. If you ask me what are some games that exist out there that are Indigenous or have Aboriginal culture in the content, I honestly couldn't give you a big title that comes to mind on the spot. I could say there are a few out there, but there could always be so much more. This is an opportunity for education across many different groups of people, not only for younger kids or teens to engage with culture, but also for people who may not have access to knowledge about the culture. So if they don't have any kind of family members, they do have some kind of way to connect with their culture. It's also an opportunity for awareness around cultural and social issues. This can be a huge step into breaking down stereotypes and closing the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So a major inspiration of mine is a game called Never Alone, developed by Upper One Games and Eline Media. If you haven't heard of it, it's a game about a young Inupiat girl who braves a blizzard with her fox friend to find her tribe. The developers worked with Alaskan native storytellers and developed a game that is unique and full of traditional lore and cultures. Narrated in native language, you're guided through the story and you play as the young girl and the fox simultaneously to overcome these like kind of spirit monsters like you can see in the picture and the terrain that they have to kind of brave through. It's a game so rich in culture that was accessible to the entire world, so not just the Inupiat people, and it told a story in such a beautiful way. And this story is now preserved forever in the form of a video game, which you can get on Steam. I really recommend it. So not only does the use of game with Indigenous content embed culture and knowledge into modern society, but it also creates many new job opportunities for Indigenous people. By getting them involved and asking them to share their knowledge and be a part of the process and creating the game and bringing the stories to life, we can create more jobs. It can also be our cultural expression for those who do not know how to. Sharing culture is a part of what keeps the culture alive. Painting, stories and songs are all traditional means of sharing culture and knowledge, but cultures do evolve and adapt. Although games may not be a traditional means of sharing, creating games can become a thriving technique and embedding culture into a modern world. There's also traditional games that tell stories or teach people skills. So games have always been really present. This is just a new form. We've got, instead of a possum skin ball shoved with dried grasses, you just put a laptop there instead. Sorry. To do all of this, it is so important to get the help from everybody. This is something that I'm really passionate about. I know many people might be sitting and thinking that this doesn't really apply to them because they're not Indigenous, or they might be kind of afraid to approach it. But the fact is that we can't do it alone. I know there are not Indigenous people who are passionate about helping breaking down that gap and barrier, but are worried about, because they're not Indigenous, that they can't help. But the fact is, we need everyone to do this together. It's not a fight that we can do on our own. So yeah, we need the help of everyone to bring our stories to life. As long as everything is approached and presented in a safe and respectful manner, there is an abundance of content that is untouched, and the potential is unlimited. So, as game designers, we have so much influence over human culture and behaviours and ways of thinking. Prime example is the Fortnite dances and how crazy they have become. It has spread across the entire globe thanks to its popularity and accessibility. People who don't even play the game or know what the game is are doing these dances. Prime example is my dad. Very inappropriate times to do those dances as well, but it's so embarrassing. But again, it is a prime example of how much influence this game has had. So, new cultures of cosplay and communities have also stemmed from people having shared interests and loves in games. So imagine what we could achieve in society if we further explore the great potential of including Indigenous themes into games. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk. That was lovely. We have about 5 minutes for questions. We have mics that will be roaming around. If you could put your hand up so that we can pass mics to you. Over here, I can pass mine.
Thanks, Chad. Speaking as a Palawa girl who, as far as I can tell, my group was destroyed, thank you for taking a minute to acknowledge Indigenous Australians who won't have the opportunity that you had. And that it really meant a lot to me to hear that.
Yeah, no worries. It's definitely something it's really important. And we have to be aware of it because it happens, and not just to my culture, but your cultures and many others. It's being lost out there. So I think there's a lot of sense of, oh, it's gone, there's not a lot that we can do, but there is still so much that we can do. And I think a new form like games is a really exciting way to explore that. Anyone else?
Anyone else? Yes, a question over here. If we can get a mic.
Thank you so much for this. Out of curiosity, how important is it to involve Indigenous culture in the interviews and whatnot throughout the entire development process, and how often would you suggest we incorporate that?
I think it's extremely important. if you're not an Indigenous person, you are, you know, using somebody else's culture for inspiration, which is amazing. But I think as often as you can, throughout the entire process, if possible, particularly when in creating new content, new ideas that come up, just to keep coming back to that, to just ensure that it's presented in a really respectful manner and make sure it doesn't come across as maybe offensive or anything like that.
Thank you.
Torres?
More questions? Yes, there's one down the back.
I just wanted to ask about that Chaos Tavern game. Is there a playable kind of build available yet, or anything we can take a look at?
The developers are actually sitting in this room.
I'd love to. Do you have like a release plan? Or are you gonna... Awesome. Okay, cool.
If you connect with us, we do lots of playtesting for playtest parties because we always need more people to play it and tell us what they like and don't like. So yeah, there's no public build that you could get online to answer that part of the question. But yeah, just talk to us because we like people.
Sweet.
Any last question? Oh, question over here.
Hi, I'm a composer and I'd love to do some work with traditional Australian instruments. Do you have any advice on finding and working with Indigenous musicians?
I think your best bet would be trying to connect online if you don't know anyone in the community specifically. Yeah, that's not really my area of expertise, I'm sorry, but yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We have time for one last question if anyone else would like to ask a question. Okay. Oh, okay. One question here.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I know that within a lot of the film industries, there's obviously a plethora of information out there on engaging with Indigenous communities and making sure that the voice is heard and honest within all projects. Are there any sort of bits of information that you might be able to give in the way that game development might differ from that process, or you know, any advice you might be able to give for a developer as to where to start or who to engage with first?
Tough question. I am only just really getting into all of this, but I know there are a lot of elders and people who are quite prominent in the community, and there's also organisations that you might be able to reach out to in terms of gauging interest in anyone who might be interested in working with and kind of that sense. But that's what I'm kind of doing, is as an Indigenous person, being that kind of middle ground liaison to help reach our community and take those steps. But yeah. Excellent.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have. Can we thank Phoebe again, please?